Hello, and welcome to virtual Scandinavia House in New York, and to the fifth of the Nordic literature panels, Authors You Should Know, with this week's focus on Norwegian literature from Norway, with Jan Grue, Roy Jacobsen, Kaja Kvernbakken, and Ruth Lillegraven, moderated by the author and translator, Karen Havelin. Next week, on Tuesday, we'll explore the Sami literature and conclude the series in 2 weeks with Swedish literature. Support for this event has been graciously provided by Norla. Media support for the series is provided by the journal EuropeNow, published by the Council for European Studies at Columbia University. And I would also like to thank the Royal Norwegian Consulate General in New York for the continued support of Scandinavia House and for its Norwegian programs. This panel will be recorded and available afterwards on our website, scandinavias.org, and on our YouTube page. The moderator, Karen Havelin, is a writer and translator from Bergen, Norway. She attended Skrivkunst Academy in Nordaland and has a bachelor's degree in French, literature, and gender studies from the University of Bergen and the University of Paris Sorbonne. She has completed her MFA in fiction from Columbia University in May of 2013. Work has been published in both Norwegian and in English. Her first novel, Please Read This Leaflet Carefully, was published simultaneously in the US, the UK, and Norway in the spring of 2019 from Dorter Press, Deadlink Books, and Cappelen Dam. This means that Karen wrote both the English and the Norwegian version at the same time. So please welcome Karen.
Hi. Thank you, Kyle. There we are. Thank you so much for giving me this assignment. I've really enjoyed all this work. I picked some of my favorite Norwegian writers, and afterwards I realized there is a surprising amount of overlapping themes and stylistic choices. Whether that represents a Norwegian quality, I'm not sure, but hopefully we'll get to that at the end. And before I forget, I should say thank you to Norla and to Oliver Meustad in particular for helping us, particularly by letting us use this room. So I'm going to introduce each writer, and then they will read a short snippet in Norwegian, so you get a feel for the language, and then a bit longer in English. And then I'll ask them each a few questions. And then at the end, we'll have a little time to talk and answer audience questions. So we're going to start with Kaja Kvernbakken, who's right here. Kaja Kvernbakken is an author of poems, plays, and a novel. Life with parents in the Navy made her move all over Norway, but she now lives in Oslo. She has worked as a translator from French, as an editor, a knitwear designer, pizza chef, and lifeguard, to mention just a few. Kvernbakken is now a full-time writer. Her fictional debut, The Scent of Chlorine, was published in 2019 and tells the story of a talented young swimmer torn between her career and her family. Go ahead, Kaja.
Thank you. So first a little snippet in Norwegian. Det fortsatt hvite flekker med snø I fjellet. De nekter å slippe taket og sender kalde vindgust nedover fjellsidene mot fjorden. Jeg trekker benken I le for vinden. Sola tar tak I huden min, klemmer den sammen. Jeg lener hodet I hånda. Jeg har lukta på hud som solbrun. Den lukter svagt svidd. Min hud lukter svagt av klor, selv nå, midt på sommeren. Det en lukt som aldri blir borte. Jeg aldri lenge nok ut av vannet til at den slipper taket. Klormolekylene har trengt seg inn I porene og festet seg der. Og det lukter hverken hud eller sol. Det lukter bare timevis med meter. And so for the English part. There are still white spots of snow in the mountains. They refuse to let go and send cold gusts of wind down the mountainside toward the fjord. I pull the bench to a spot that's shielded from the wind. The sun grabs hold of my skin and squeezes. I rest my head in my hand. I've smelled tanned skin before. It smells slightly singed. My skin smells faintly of chlorine, even now in the middle of the summer. It's a smell that never goes away. I never stay out of the water long enough for it to let go. Molecules of chlorine have penetrated the pores and gotten stuck there, and it doesn't smell like skin or like sunshine. It only smells like hours and hours of lapse. Dad and you are on the floor in front of a pile of Legos. You holds a small yellow 2x2 brick in his fingers. He twirls it again and again and again. Dad has built a dinosaur, a house, a tree, and a car. Roar, Dad says, and smashes the house with the dinosaur. Then he looks at you. You looks at the yellow brick. Roar, says Dad, and pretends he's going to let the dinosaur eat Yu's brick. Yu moves the brick closer to his body without looking at Dad. Dad gets up and sits in the chair next to Yu. He looks at him. After a while, Yu puts the brick on the rug. He turns over onto his stomach and puts his forehead on the brick and squeezes his head against the floor. Dad jumps up from the chair, lifts Yu. The brick is stuck to his forehead. He has a white and red imprint on his skin. Stop it, Yu, says Dad. You could hurt yourself. Yu stares up at Dad. Then he grabs the brick from Dad's hands and goes to sit underneath the staircase. Dad picks up the rest of the Legos, but keeps glancing over towards the staircase. Quit whining, I say as I go up the stairs, but I make sure to say it so that only you can hear it. You can't be the best at everything, says Therese, at least not on the very first try. Therese looks towards the swimmers down by the pool, but leans her whole body towards me. Her voice almost doesn't reach my ears. I breathe with every cell in my body, feel the warmth in my skin, know that the body knows, it is drawn to the water. I just want you to know, says Therese, competing against other clubs is different than competing against your teammates every day. The other clubs have great swimmers too, and that's okay. I don't want you to be disappointed. This is your very first meet, and I want us to focus on the positive. It's a positive thing if you qualify for other meets. It's a positive thing if you set a personal best on any distance. That's good. That means you're growing. The white caps down there swim just fine. One ends up in 3rd place, one in 5th. Each time one of them finishes, Therese hurries down to the edge of the pool, hands out high fives, points, and explains. They announce my heat. I walk from the bleachers down to the waiting benches, walk from one bench to another and to the edge of the pool. My lane, the point up ahead in the blue water where I will slice through the surface. I put my hoodie in the box, jump up and down on my toes 4 times, swing my arms back and forth around my body and climb onto the starting block, curl my toes around the edge, let my hands hang down limp in front of me. On the first signal, I grip the block and bend my knees so my body's tense with energy from my tailbone through my curved back then into my arms. On the second signal, I loosen the grip, let my knees spring and swing my arms out in front of me, forward towards the translucent surface, shiny for a few seconds longer until I pierce it like an arrow and propel myself forward underwater with my legs joined together. Then I break the surface again, from below this time, and everything is a frothy white around me. It's only later, when my palm hits the wall for the last time, that all the sounds flood me. The voices mix and reverberate from the vaulted ceiling, from the windows, from the water, and it's so loud I can't hear myself think. Hands grab me, someone shouts, new record, new goddamn Norwegian junior record. No one is even close to my time. I'm so far ahead. Therese widens her eyes at the scoreboard while holding onto my shoulders. God damn, she shouts, holy shit. In the dressing room, there's complete chaos. Girls running back and forth, shrieking and laughing. I stand facing the wall in the shower, breathe, shake out my arms, shake out my legs, try to get the lactic acid out of my body.
Thank you. That was
you.
great. So this main character in this novel, she's in a rather stressful situation. Could you just tell us briefly about the setting, who the novel's about, and where it takes place?
Yeah, it's at a military base, naval base in the north of Norway. So the main character, she's called Mina. She's around 17 years old, late teens, I would say. And she lives with her dad and her younger brother. And there's something not quite right with the brother. And the dad kind of cracks under the pressure as we get further into the novel. So it starts out quite idyllic, but you get the sense that something is wrong, and then eventually he can't cope anymore.
Yeah, they're very isolated in their situation.
Yeah.
I have to say, I did this translation, and I would be happy to translate the whole book if anyone is interested in that. And as I was working on the translation, I realized it's almost like a poem when you read it, because it's written in short vignettes, and they're very tight, very polished. So it's a very satisfying and quick read, and very heartbreaking, I would say. This particular style, the very sort of simple and sparse style, did that come to you early in the process?
Yes and no. I have very strong opinions about language, because I want it to be simple. I don't want it to be full of words that people don't understand. So I want it to be immediate, and just that the simplicity of it all is what tears you apart when you read it, kind of. And as I work with my texts, I always read them out loud again and again and again until I get the rhythm quite right, and just change the words around until it rings right to me. So yes, and it's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a problem, because you first have to have a story that works, right? It won't help you to have a beautiful language if it doesn't tell a proper story. So I can get stuck on the story or on the language part, but yeah.
I think we can all identify with that. I don't know. I'm tempted to ask you more about the main themes of this novel. It's a very corporeal book. It has a very sort of a body, a feel for the body. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was funny, because when I was working on it, my editor once said it seems as if you are very locked in the body in what you're writing, and I love that. And that kind of helped me put some rules around what I was writing, kind of to help me put a good box around it, to help me write in a productive way, so that I could just limit myself. Okay, if it doesn't talk about kind of how it feels in the body, or the immediate things that she can either hear or feel or see, then it doesn't belong. So there's not a lot of reflections. There are some, of course, but mainly she kind of focuses on her own body and the sensations of it, and the sensations of her body swimming, and how that works out. And when she's thinking, she's thinking more about the technical things, like how do I swim in the proper way? How do I eat to grow stronger? How do I rest to grow stronger? So it all revolves back to her body, and how she can become the very best swimmer possible. And then also because she's in a very stressful situation with her father, it's kind of with her father and her brother, she feels as if she doesn't belong in her family. There's no room for her, you know, because of the brother. He takes up so much space, and her only refuge is swimming. And she doesn't want to think, she doesn't want to feel, she just wants to find refuge where she can, and that is by just focusing on her own body.
I think it's very successful because it's very compelling and sort of clean, and you really just want to stay in the novel when you're reading it. Thank you. I think we're gonna move on to Jan. Are you ready? Yeah, so this is Jan Grue. You ready to read?
I am, yeah. So I'll start with a small excerpt in Norwegian to give the flavor. Fra tid til annen treffer jeg mennesker som kjente meg som barn, men som ikke ventet å møte meg som voksen. Alminnelig høflighet får dem som regel til å skjule overraskelsen over å se meg ute i verden. Det kreves en åpning i samtalen, et tomrom, for at de skal få sagt høyt det de først tenkte da de så meg. Lever du fremdeles? Min livssynslærer på ungdomsskolen fortalte en historie. Da mannen hennes døde, klippet hun det lange håret sitt. Etterpå sank hun ned i badekaret. Hun opplevde det som en renselse. Hun var opptatt av ritualer, hun brakte et alvor til timene som jeg, en ytterst alvorlig 14-åring, satte pris på. Jeg ville lære mest mulig, det føltes som om jeg hadde hastverk. Av livssynslæreren min lærte jeg ordet liminalfase. Det beskrev den mest sårbare delen av et overgangsritual der man befinner seg mellom verdener. Det er fasen når den unge ikke lenger er barn, men ennå ikke er voksen, når den døende har forlatt de levendes verden, men ennå ikke er blitt en av forfedrene. Det er i disse fasene det virkelig kan gå galt, men det er også i disse fasene at transformasjonen skjer. Det er i disse fasene vi blir til. Uten dem går ikke verden videre.
Thank you. I realize I completely forgot to introduce you.
Go ahead.
Let me do that now. Jan Grue is the author of the autobiographical and auto-theoretical book, I Live a Life Like Yours, A Record of My Body, which he's reading from today, which is the winner of the 2018 Norwegian Critics Award for Nonfiction and Norway's nominee for the Nordic Council Literary Prize. He is a professor at the University of Oslo, working in disability studies, rhetoric, and discourse analysis, and has, since his literary debut, Everything Under Control, in 2010, published 5 short story collections, a dystopian novel, 3 non-dystopian children's books. His books have been translated into English, Hungarian, Danish, Swedish, and Dutch.
Okay, and with that, I'll read the English excerpt. Thank you, Karen. From time to time, I cross paths with someone who knew me as a child but never expected to meet me as an adult. Out of common courtesy, they are usually able to conceal their surprise at seeing me out in the world until an opening, a gap in the conversation, allows them the space to articulate their initial reaction. So, you're still alive? My junior high ethics teacher once told a story. When her husband died, she cut off her long hair. Afterwards, she sank beneath the water in her bathtub. This she experienced as a purification. She was interested in rituals, and she brought a measure of gravity to her class, which I valued as an extremely grave 14-year-old. I wanted to learn as much as possible. Time, it seemed, was running out. My ethics teacher taught me the term liminal phase. It describes the most vulnerable part of a rite of passage, the point at which one finds oneself between worlds. It is the period in which a young person is no longer a child, though not yet an adult, or when the dead have abandoned the world of the living but cannot yet be counted as ancestors. It is during these phases that things can go drastically wrong, but also when transformation takes place. We come into being in these phases. Without them, the world could not go on. I progressed from junior high to high school and then to university. And then one day I ran into my old teacher again at a conference. She had gone on to graduate school. Her master's thesis was on Norse mythology, on the Jotuns, the dark and treacherous aspects of humanity. I was a doctoral student in linguistics. I'd begun an in-depth study of rhetoric and how reality may be altered through language. She had written a history of mentalities, about modes of thinking that we can no longer fathom. Our worlds had reconvened. in a sense. My old teacher wasn't surprised to hear that I was pursuing my doctorate. My junior high school was a short 10-minute walk from the university library, where I once used my mother's library card to check out books on the shamanism of indigenous Siberian tribes. I was familiar with academia from childhood, and it shaped others' impressions of me. It promised a particular kind of future in the same way that the opening sentence in a book points to how the story is going to unfold. She was, however, surprised at how good I looked. This was the other narrative of the future, the one that didn't have to do with my language, but with my body. This phrase makes me feel uncertain. You look so good. Yes, don't I? I dress nicely. I've spent time educating myself about cut, about style. I got a tailored coat when I was 18. I like coats with cuffs that can be unbuttoned and Oxford shirts with collars that roll the right way. But that wasn't what she meant. That which lies beneath, the surprise that I'm still alive, surfaces only later in the evening, or at least that was true for the author I knew from high school. 10 years later, we stood together in the grand ballroom at Oslo's Hotel Bristol. She said it with a blend of melancholy and reluctance. Her eyes were so mild. She remarked that it was something they all knew back then, that I was not going to live very long. Something they knew? This wasn't something I knew. And since it certainly wasn't me who had placed this idea in their heads, where did it come from? The author I knew from high school couldn't say. The notion simply existed. It was a shadow cast by nothing. The only substantial point of reference was my body. In those days, I often rode in a wheelchair, but I also frequently crossed the schoolyard on foot. I used to go out during breaks and stand around in a circle with everyone else. We would talk about our teachers. We would talk about James Joyce. It was that kind of school. I thought I was just one among many. I didn't know I was projecting a particularly tragic aura. I did know. I didn't have the words to express it. I'm trying now to find them.
Thank you. That was great. This reminds me yet again about all the feelings I have about your book. And as I was rereading it now, there's so much more that I discovered. So just to start, could you tell us briefly how this book came about?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a long time writing this book. I mean, close to 10 years. And so scraps and stories were in it from way back, but the transformative event, the catalytic event, happened after I became father, when my parents asked me whether I wanted to take over their records from my childhood. And I said, yes, I'd like to have those. And so my mother came by my office one day at the university and dropped off close to 3 feet, social distancing amount of documents and records of all the letters they'd written with social services, with doctors, with various agencies. And I sat down and I read through these records, and it was really something of a shock. Because I was born with a congenital muscular disease, condition. But of course that didn't really define my childhood, and it didn't define how I remembered my childhood. But here was this archive of how really the state and the medical bureaucracy remembered my childhood. And it was so alien and alienating. And I could not at all recognize myself in these texts, and yet I could. And so there were these two competing versions of my childhood and of my life. The one I remembered, and then the one I could see written very distinctly, very clearly written down in all of these documents. And I thought I really need to write about this and to try to understand how these versions of my life can coexist.
Yeah, it's very strange to have basically books by many different authors about your life in that way. So your book, is it a disability memoir?
I would say yes and no. I mean, I'm obviously a disabled person. My wheelchair is parked outside this room, and I use it every day. And yet at the same time, disability memoir is so wide as to almost be a gender memoir. It's too abstract, it's too broad. And so I use the word disability exactly once in this book when talking about what I do at work, which is work in disability studies. So I think, yes, it speaks to my experience in the world as a disabled person, but I've tried to be really, as Kaja was saying, as specific and as concrete and as clear about my experience of the world as possible, and to talk about what it is to to be this body is really at the center of the book. So it's definitely a disability memoir in the sense that there are so many really wonderful disability memoirs that have been written over the years. But at the same time, they speak to such radically different experiences of the world that I almost hesitate to use that label.
It's very much in this is the part of the material that you go through in the book.
Yeah.
And it's beautifully done. I'll ask you one more question for now. Can you tell us briefly how disability typically is written about or portrayed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a short question with a 10,000 page answer because disability is absolutely everywhere in literature. But I think that the thing that's mostly concerns me is the way that disability and labels like it become so heavily deterministic. It's what I was talking about in the excerpt I read, that once you've enter that category, or once you've been labeled with that label, there's a very clear expectation of what your life's going to be like. Often tragic, sometimes heroic, but usually not heroic in a good way. And so I tried to do some kind of a counter writing to write against that story, and really to again write as concretely and as really as particular, be as particular and be as specific about my experience of the world as I possibly could.
Yeah, I'm so excited that this book is coming out. Okay, we're gonna move on to Ruth. Ruth Lillegraven's debut was the poetry collection Big Bad Poems from 2005. Since then, she's published a novel and 3 further poetry collections translated into several languages. She's also published 6 books for children and the play Callie. Her work has been nominated for several awards and won, among others, the Brage Prize and the Norsk Literature Prize. Her latest novel, Everything Is Mine, the book we're talking about today, has sold to 7 countries, as well as film rights to Nordic film. She also very recently published a poetry collection written in and about the spring of 2020. Go ahead.
I'll read shortly in Norwegian first. It's actually from chapter 2, Klara. En statsråd ringer sjelden eller aldri selv. Kutyme er at Vigdis, sekretæren til justisminister Anton Munch, ringer og spør om jeg kan komme innom. Tonen er høflig, men spørsmålet er retorisk. Du har å innfinne deg, pronto. Jeg kjem, sier jeg nå, reiser meg, retter på drakta og lagrer dokumentet jeg jobber i. Mitt 3. barn. Forslaget til endring i Norges lover. Prop 220 L, 78 sider tekst, 11 kapittel. Bakgrunn, formål, gjeldende rett, vurderinger og forslag. Lengst bak merknader så selve forslaget til lovtekst. Og den absurde standardformuleringen «Vi Harald, Norges konge» aller lengst bak. Lovforslaget skal sørge for at folk i alle instanser, sykehus, barnehage, barnevern og helsestasjoner skal føle sterkere ansvar for å varsle ved mistanke om vold eller misbruk. Varslingsplikter har vært tåkete, teieplikter har blitt understreket overalt. Det skal bli annerledes nå. Forslaget er så godt som ferdig. Nå driver jeg bare og strammer og skrur og pusser på teksten som var han en skulptur. Prøver å få alt til å skyne. And then in English, It's from the advanced reader's copy of the book that will be published in English next spring. And it's translated by Diane Oatley. And first from chapter 1, it's, well, in Norwegian he's called Håvard, and in English, Henrik. Yes. Whatever you do, don't get divorced. Oxel, a lifelong buddy of mine who is divorced, had given me this warning the evening before, over a beer and with the sound of the Premier League soccer game in the background. Divorce is fucking expensive, he said. You'll be taken to the cleaners. Take a financial worst case scenario and multiply it by 2. No, by 3. That's how much a divorce costs. So I hang in there, do the best I can. The door to the balcony slams hard. Klara's passive-aggressive way of waking me up. Through the fluttering white curtains, I can just make out her tall, slender silhouette on the balcony outside the bedroom. Klara is a creature of habit. She loves standing out there for a minute or 2 in the morning, striking the same Titanic pose she always assumes whether we're on vacation in Western Norway or at our home in Oslo. The past few days, the heat has hung quivering in the air with an almost violence. It's unusual after a long, hard winter and the spring that came and went in a flash. At the boys' school, on the street, in the store, everywhere, people are talking about the winter that was just here, about the spring that didn't happen, about how unseasonal this premature African heat is. Personally, I'm enjoying it. If Klara can look in the support she needs for her bill, maybe we can take a trip to Kielsund. My parents are not getting any younger, and the cottage needs to be open for the summer. You have to get up, she says when she comes inside again, or you won't get them to school on time. It's our turn to drive the carpool this week, and I promise to take care of it. I notice a sickening aftertaste of beer in my throat. I had one too many, apparently. I can't drink it all anymore. I keep my eyes shut, pretending I'm still asleep. It has always irritated Klara that I'm not as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as she is in the morning. But that doesn't mean I won't manage to get up and get the children to school. I am usually the one who does. And then shortly from chapter 2, where it's Klara who's the teller. A cabinet minister will seldom, if ever, call personally. Usually, it is Minister of Justice Anton Munch's secretary, Vigdis, who calls and asks if I would mind stopping by. Her tone is polite, but it's a rhetorical question. You have been summoned and must appear, pronto. I'll be right there, I say no. I get to my feet, adjust my suit, and save the document I'm working on. My third child, the proposal for an amendment of the laws of Norway, bill and draft resolution number 220, 78 pages of text, 11 chapters, background, objective, current legislation, assessments, and proposals. At the end, comments, and then the proposed wording of the act. And at the very end, the absurd standard phrasing, "We, Harald, King of Norway." The bill is intended to ensure that employees of all public institutions, hospital, child welfare authorities, kindergartens, and public health clinics feel a stronger sense of responsibility for sounding the alarm in the event of any suspicion of violence or abuse. The duty to issue such alerts has been vague, and the professional secrecy has been emphasized in all contexts. Things will be different now. The bill is almost done. I'm tightening and adjusting, polishing the text as if it was a marble sculpture, trying to make every word shine.
Thank you. That's a good selection. You get a feel for them. To start, you've mostly written poetry, or you're known for poetry
Mhm.
in Norway. So what made you take on writing a thriller or a crime novel?
It's kind of a girlish dream I had almost since the publishing of my first book. I've always read a lot of different stuff myself, everything from poetry to crime fiction, and I really wanted, after my debut, I wanted to write a novel, and I didn't know what it was supposed to be about or how to write it, but it's about the same story now. I wanted to challenge myself doing something different. Also I find crime fiction, it's a bit often criticized, but I find it interesting and quite challenging.
Yeah, I think for many writers, it's kind of the dream to knock out a perfect thriller and make 1 million books.
That's not that easy.
Not going into that, but what was the hardest part about it, and what did you enjoy about changing this to this genre?
Well, the hardest part is maybe when I write poetry, I write very intuitive, but this plotting or planning of the story is quite technical in a book like this. So that was unusual for me, and I wrote a lot of stuff that I just had to throw away. But so I find it challenging, but also very fun, because I'm allowed to do things in a book like this that I'm not allowed to do in other kind of books. So living out my dark sides now.
Yeah. It's a very fun read and very engaging. So you definitely have it under control. Can you tell us briefly about the couple at the center of the novel?
Yeah, I wanted it to be a book about a couple that seemed to be about like every one of us, normal people with normal jobs and children and parents, and with normal problems.
I think they're a little fancier than
maybe a bit
most of us
fancier. They
maybe.
live in a great mansion at the Oslo West, and so they have nice jobs, and they are privileged people, but their surface is better than the real life. They don't speak a lot together anymore, and they're very much into their jobs and not into their family life. And there are normal people in a way, but then things starts to happen, and I try to push them a bit further and see what happened. And they are very different. They have very different backgrounds. She is from western part of Norway. She has had a difficult childhood with and he's from this western part of Oslo, and and they have very different personalities. She's quite strict and seems to be quite cold, but he's more warm and easygoing. And these differences, maybe they thought it was what attracted them with each other in the beginning, but now it only irritates them.
I really like Klara. She's very hard to like, but also she's very easy to love. So that's very successful.
Well, after spending 2-3 years with her, I think I got some kind of Stockholm syndrome or something, because I really love her. And when people say, "Oh, she's hard to like," I say, "What? I can't understand that. I like her."
Yeah, I like her too. And I was really happy to hear that there's another book coming.
Yeah, I'm trying to write it these days.
Yeah. Okay, one last brief question. The book has a theme that for me gave it very kind of higher stakes than many crime novels that I've read. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's the nice thing. One of the nice things about this crime fiction, I think, is that you can hopefully write exciting and entertaining books, but you're also allowed to highlight difficult topics. And the topic in this book is violence against children. Klara is, as you heard, working on a new law on this field, and Håvard Henrik is he works as a doctor at one of the big hospitals in Oslo, and he's a doctor. He receives a lot of children that has been abused or so they are both working in this field. And when the crime plot starts with some killings, they are also related to this topic in a way. And yeah, so it's like a red thread in Norwegian. What's it's like going through the book, but it's not all about violence, but it's there underlying.
Yeah, it adds weight to everything. A through line, I guess we could say. Okay, thank you. Okay, you need to do a little reshuffling, and then we have Roy Jacobsen.
Please.
Roy Jacobsen has had a long career as a writer. Born in Oslo, he made his publishing debut in 1982 with a short story collection, Fangeliv, Prison Life, which won Tare Vesaas Prize for Debut Fiction. He has won the Norwegian Critics' Prize for Literature, has been nominated 3 times for the International Dublin Literary Award, and twice for the Nordic Council Literature Prize. In 2000 alone, he was shortlisted for both the Man Booker International Prize, as the first Norwegian author ever, and the International Dublin Literary Award for The Unseen, the book that we're talking about today, which was published in the UK in 2016 and will be out in North America in 2020. Maybe it's already out.
I hope.
The Unseen is the first of a series of 4 books so far, the latest of which was published in Norway this fall. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will read some words in Norwegian first. Ingrid liker ikke disse stormene, knakingen i huset og trompetstøtene opp gjennom pipa, hele universet i opprør. Vinden som river lufta ut av lungene hennes når hun med mora i fjøset. Som driver vannet ut av øynene hennes og feier henne inn i vegger og krumbøyde trær, og tvinger hele familien til å ligge i kjøkken og stue, der de likevel ikke får blund på et øye. Særlig det ille å se på faren. Hadde ikke Ingrid visst bedre, kunne hun ha trodd at han var redd, og det han aldri. En øyboer ikke redd, da kan han ikke bo her. En øyboer mørk til sinns, ikke stiv av skrekk, men av alvor. The main character in the book is a young girl at this stage, around 7 maybe, living on a remote island on the coast of northern Norway with her family. The family being the only inhabitants of the island. These are Robinson Crusoe's representatives of the coast of Norway. Ingrid doesn't like these storms, the creaking of the house and the trumpet blasts from the chimney, the whole universe in turmoil, the wind that tears the breath out of her lungs when she goes to the barn with her mother, that drives the moisture from her eyes and sweeps her into vaults and bowed trees, and forces the entire family to camp down in the kitchen and sitting room, and even there they don't get a wink of sleep. The sight of her father is the worst. Had Ingrid not known better, she might have thought he was afraid, and he never is. Islanders are afraid. If they were, they wouldn't be able to live here. Islanders have a dark disposition. They are beset not with fear, but solemnity. And suddenly he is struck by a thought and tells Ingrid to go out with him to look at the sea, so that she will learn not to fear it, now while it is at its most tempestuous, at its most instructive. He doesn't know why this idea occurs to him. She doesn't either. But he puts on her coat and they go out. The raging firmament above them, drag themselves southwards, wade against the current in a river of wind and water, struggle over 3 stone walls and crouch down behind one to catch their breath, clamber over another, Ingrid's father laughing at every obstacle. She has to hold both hands in front of her face to breathe. Up the knoll which constitutes the last bastion against the roar that comes to meet them. Foaming walls of water towering up in the black night and crashing down towards them, smashing against the rock and beach and stone, causing sand and shell and ice to lash at them. This is something no one can face or comprehend or remember. The trumpets of doom. All you can do is rid it from your mind. It won't hurt you, her father screams in her ear, but she doesn't hear. Neither of them hears. He screams that she has to feel with her body that the island is immovable, even though it trembles and both the heavens and the sea are in turmoil. An island can never go under. Although it may quake, it is rock solid and eternal, fixed to the earth itself. Yes, at this moment, it is almost a religious belief he wants to share with his daughter. Teach her the basic principle that an island can never founder, never.
Thank you. So that's a good lead up to my first question. Bare, is it a real island?
No, it's a fictitious island. But like every fiction is, of course, a composite of 100,000 or maybe thousands of islands, different islands. This is my territory. I grew up in this area.
You did?
Yeah, I grew actually up in Oslo, in a working class area in Oslo, but my mother was from one of these islands. So I had to go up there every summer, me and my sister, in something they called a holiday. It turned out, of course, to be a labor camp, but that was the tradition in the 60s. And I learned to know my grandfather was a very strange guy, and I learned the dialect they spoke up there, and all the family mythology came to me and became part of the air that I bred in. So I had actually 2 childhoods, one in Oslo in this working class area and one on this island. And then later on, when I grew up, I had 1 year in the university studying mathematics, but I found out I had to see the world. The world is somewhere else, I thought, maybe from reading Milan Kundera. So I went up there and I stayed, and I found my wife, the woman in my life, and I spent like 11 years on the coast on different islands like this, and I was a fisherman and a whaler and a carpenter even, and a teacher. So I feel I know this subject in and out, and but I really struggle with the storyline, how to describe a family situation historically somewhat truthful, where nothing actually is happening, but when everything is actually happening too. So I spent like 35 years thinking about how to do this novel, and then all of a sudden, and then Sunday afternoon in 2011, I had the first line, and then from there on,
yeah, that's
it went.
Just appears the perfect.
And of course, in addition to that, I wanted to have a female main character because I'm a man. I find that very natural. I spent like 45 years trying to figure out what's going on in my life, for instance. And before that, I had 20 years struggling with my mother. So that's one of the most, that was not the main reason. The main reason being that this story, this historic episode, this history of Norway had actually never been told from the perspective of a woman before. And I found that quite interesting also to say something, maybe something different, maybe something new about the roles of the male on the coast, the fishermen. So choosing a woman, I got two in one, I thought.
Yeah, I think it works.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was one of my questions to ask, because about the physical labor that they're constantly doing is like the book is suffused with it, that it could be written by someone who has done that work and who's like, they're always looking for the next task that needs doing, and it's never done. So it's something that I really enjoyed. Yeah, one thing that people maybe don't realize is I have a feeling for more or less for this island is because my parents-in-law live nearby, but actually more or less half of Norway is even further north than this island, which is interesting to think about. How has this book been read by people in other countries, and is there a particular response that you find satisfying?
Yeah, it's always interesting to get translated to get different reactions, and you will see the reaction is always mirroring the country where it's been read, but they have something in common, and that's this is actually what shall I say? Maybe I managed to find something universal. The feeling of isolation, the feeling of man versus nature, of woman versus nature, woman in nature, to being dependent upon your surroundings. You're not possible to go away. You are stuck with your own knowledge and the things that you have inherited from your parents to try to get by, to survive in these harsh circumstances. And then, of course, the big machinery of history, the changes starts to get in, to influence this lifestyle, and everyone can relate to that. I think in Hungary, in Azerbaijan, or wherever. So it's actually being exotic isn't that original. I discovered
because it starts at the early 20th century, basically, right? And then it
in some ways it's historical novel, but historic novel is always, if it succeeds, I think at least a contemporary novel, due first and foremost to the fact that it couldn't have been written in the 40s and the 50s, had been written in 2011 and in the 15, and then in my time by me. That's one reason. The other reason is that this is built on empathy, insight, historical insight, intellectual groundwork done by me, by the author, trying to, what should I say, put myself into a situation that is not mine, but my parents, something that I have inherited, stories that I've heard, but not experienced. And this makes, as I said, every historic novel to a contemporary novel, as far as I am concerned.
That's a very nice quote to end on, I think. So I think we're gonna, if you could move the camera. And I think we have a few minutes before we go to the questions from the audience. Yeah, everyone. So what I was thinking when I was looking over all these books is that there's a certain common thread of corporeal vulnerability or children, and with your book, Lloyd, one thing that I really found beautiful is how because there's so few people and they're on this island, everyone there is needed, and people who might seem like they would only be a liability in that kind of very precarious life on the brink of disaster all the time actually turn out to be indispensable. And like everything, it's not as, it is not a question of only the strongest, which I think.
No, they are neatly knitted together. They are dependent on each other. The weak one, the strong one, the so-called leader, the children, the parents, the aunt of this girl who is also indispensable.
Yeah.
It turns out, who is what they called in my time disabled somehow. She has some trouble with her mind, and they try to get rid of her. But it turns out that they have to, they tried 3 times actually. They had to try yeah, like in the fairy tales. And they had to realize that she belongs on the island. That's her paradise and her hell and her destiny. And it's also, and she's also a very, very important piece in the fabric of the society. They didn't at that time stuck people like this into hospitals. They integrated them into the family and discovered, in my case at least, in this case, and I know several of them, that she belongs there. She's necessary.
Yeah, she saves the day on multiple occasions.
Yeah, a lot of them.
So it's kind of interesting how at the start of the 20th century, your characters don't really have a network, or like there's no social security. At one point, some parents go missing and there's nobody to call or write to, and somebody just has to take care of it, of the kids. Whereas in your book, Jan, social security is basically a character that you almost speak to. For me, this social welfare is it's almost like the decisive Norwegian or Nordic thing that I depend on, or that I rely on.
And it's also, I mean, it works in tandem with what you were talking about, that you only really get the welfare system or the social security system as we know it in tandem with industrial capitalism and the labor market, where everyone is working as an individual and really working or supposed to be working independently of their family situation. And as a lot of us have discovered during 2020, trying to work from home independent of your family situation can be a tiny bit challenging.
Yeah, that some of the situation that seem very natural and the only way to do it for us now are actually quite a recent invention, where everyone goes away from their family to a job. Kaja, in your book also, the way I read it, they definitely, I mean, they need more help than they are getting, and that's what's going on. They live a very isolated life also in the northern part of Norway.
Yeah.
Is that do you think that they are not getting the help they need, or is it even?
I think they're not getting the help they need, which is interesting. Like what Ruth is writing about, like a law for teachers and other caretakers to address children not getting what they need in their families. You know, there has been a lot of talk about that in Norwegian media the last few years, with children dying from what do you call it, neglect, and at the same time, you know, the Mina, the main character in my novel, her coach sees that there is something amiss. You know, she can see that there's something wrong, and she tries to address it. But Mina wants to protect her family. You know, there's shame related to these things. You don't want to admit that you can't cope on your own. And so Mina pushes her away, and she stays away, which is, you know, a sad truth often. I think people don't want to push. It's private. You know, if you can't cope, that's private. And it also isn't, because there's human lives involved. So it shouldn't be completely private.
Yeah. It's, I think people think of Norway as a very wealthy and fortunate place. But I guess your book also illustrates that all the, we haven't closed all the gaps to a...
No, because, you know, someone has to ask for the help. And if no one's asking, then someone outside has to spot that help is needed, and then dare to actually say, you guys need help. Yeah. So.
So this is a question to everyone, basically, before I think we go to the audience questions. Do you think that since Norway is such a safe and wealthy country, that we end up with literature that often has rather low stakes, that we kind of have a lot of safety?
Or the other way around. I mean, I heard a podcast, an American podcast a while back, where they said that really Scandinavian crime novels only really work because it's a society where murder is still shocking.
Yeah. That's a good point. I think maybe we should go to the audience questions.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This question comes from Shannon, and she's asking all the authors, where do the ideas from your books come from or start?
Yeah, well, where does an idea come from? It comes from everywhere, from playing with grandchildren to playing with children, fighting with your mother, by hating someone, trying to solve a problem, a domestic one, or maybe an intellectual one. You don't know where the ideas come from. They are ubiquitous, or they are not there at all. But in my case, my ideas turns up normally in a context of a subject that I know something about, that I'm entrenched in, so to speak. I once went to Finland, not to write a book, but to try to have some kind of holiday, and we traveled around in the trenches from the Second World War around in Finland. I never thought about writing about this, and then all of a sudden one morning I awoke on the border to Russia, and I had an idea for a novel. Wow. Where did that come from? Obviously from me as being particularly me, my person, my identity, meeting this all historic remains that still are there, and that happened. And I didn't even go home. I started to write on this journey and worked for like 3 months and thought it was terrible, and then put it aside, and then rediscovered it 3 months later, and then rewrote it, and so on.
But I also found it interesting what you said earlier, how you had the idea for these books.
I lacked the idea.
You lacked the idea.
I had the book, but I lacked the light bulb, so to speak.
And then you got like the sentence to write it.
And the first sentence.
It's just in a flash, and there you can go from there.
På en vindstille dag stiger røyken rett opp. That was it.
It's a great sentence.
All right, here's another question. Well, 1 second. Too many chats are coming in. Do you find that you're writing more or less during the coronavirus? And they would also like to thank you for being all together for the event. The listeners enjoy this setup instead of each individual sitting in their own homes. So how do you find working within the sort of the new world order, as we would say? you know, in quarantine. I know Norway hasn't quarantined as much as the US has to now, so.
It's boring.
Yeah.
It's everyday life for me. I've been quarantined for 45 years. What would you expect? The only thing I experience these days by coronavirus is when I go outside, and I hate to go outside. I like to sit home and work, so it works well for me.
In a way, it's a great time for writers.
Yeah,
I think the big difference is whether you have children.
Traveling is off. All social grievances are off. I can stay home, and I still keep contact with my family. We are one cohort, 11 of us. The 3 generations we are singing together, and that's what I need.
Yeah, Jan and Ruth, you guys have children that have been at home.
Yeah, and then my family and I were in the US this winter, so we had to travel back to Norway in late March at the top of the peak of the first wave. So at this point, boring is good. Boring is very good. Not saying I'm getting that writing done because I'm also teaching classes via Zoom at the university. But yeah, I would love to be even more cooped up and write.
Yeah, I think we're less influenced by this situation than many other people, because we sit at home writing. The big difference for me was when my 2 twin boys suddenly in March were supposed to be home 24/7, and I was supposed to teach them.
Your mother?
Yeah.
24/7.
And I did that for 2 days or something. I tried to be very good at it, and then I was and they were teaching themselves kind of. But then I ended up. I was kind of disturbed by the situation, both by the kids and the whole big corona thing. So suddenly I found myself writing a new poetry collection instead of the novel I was supposed to write. But it was a very, actually a very good period of writing for me this spring and summer. And yeah, for the writing, I think it's quite good. It's a bit the social parts
we will wish for more corona.
Yeah, well, but I kind of miss those social arenas where we could meet other authors, and yeah, the social part of the job is gone, but that's for many occupations, I think.
And the readership.
Yeah.
Everything is off. We used to travel around and meet the readers. Make speeches and
I miss the readers.
Q&As and perform somehow. And
this is the closest we get.
You have lost contact with all your readers during this period.
Yeah, that's a bit sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's been a great writing period for everyone. Just so that's, I've not been particularly productive in this year.
Okay.
How about you,
Well,
Kaja?
here's another question. Kaja, this is from Sari. Kaja mentioned how she is drawn to the sparse and precise writing. Do you think that is a reflection of Norwegian writing and language in general?
I think you find that in Norwegian literature, absolutely. It's not just me, but you find both. You find very elaborate language, very well. Karen, you said that my book was like a poem, so in a sense poetics, but you would find like more flowery language than mine, and you will find the sparse language. I think that's more taste more than national temperament. But you know, maybe someone else, maybe someone who reads Norwegian compared to American literature could say more about that. But I would say that I have read writers from other writing on other languages who write like densely like I do, or sparsely like I do. I read a lot of French literature myself, and that's kind of what I'm drawn to also in other languages. So yeah, I'm not sure. You find both.
I think everyone in this room, or every one of you guys, maybe has that in common.
And we
The sparsity.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
a very sort
Sparsity, the
of
clarity.
clean style.
But I also find my language to be different from book to book, and I think that goes for a lot of
Yeah.
authors. You don't write exactly the same way in every book. It changes with the topic and the personality of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, you have to find the rhythm of the text itself, and I would think also in Everything Is Mine, where you actually have several people telling the story, that you also have to change it up.
Yeah, I try to.
Yeah.
At least. Yes.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. There's a couple of questions about translation, so I'm just going to try to do them all at one. Let's see, they're curious about the reactions about being translated into English. If there's any thrills or shudders you experience as your work moves into English. And Karen, you might have a very interesting take since you did both of the Norwegian and the English, and you're a translator. So, and they're wondering, and how have you found the process of working with English translators?
Well, my experience means that I don't have experience being translated by anyone else, which is, I felt like I needed to have control of it myself, since I wrote my novel, or the first parts of the writing process were in English while I was in the US, and then I sort of finished it in both languages at the same time. So I think that's a very unusual experience, and I'm not sure I would recommend it to anyone because it's quite crazy making, but I would imagine it would be a super interesting experience to be translated into a language that you can understand. Do you want to say something about it?
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. I mean, so my translator, Becky Crook, and I have been in contact. We were in contact over the summer, going back and forth with the book. And the challenges are, I think, on so many levels, they're hard to count. I mean, you were talking about rhythm, you're talking about style, you're talking about just very sort of specific small problems, like the house I grew up in, which is something in Norwegian it's called a Sveitservilla. It's a kind of a regular wooden house. There's a lot of them all around Scandinavia. And so you would be able to call it a villa, right? But you can't, because in North America, in the US, I'm told that a villa is very grand, it's very stylish, it's something you would find on an Italian lake, and that's not where I grew up. So somebody suggested, or I think Google suggested, you could try Swiss chalet, but that's not. I didn't grow up on a mountain either. So we were stuck. It's a very specific Scandinavian type of building, and it doesn't translate very easily. And there were quite a few of those. So you need to decide how much do you want to explain, and then in explaining, really destroy the sparsity and the clarity of the style. How much do you want to switch things out, and so really say something that in a memoir I think is difficult to do, to say something that isn't as true as what it was in the original. So that there are no perfect solutions, but I found it interesting and really challenging to try to work closely with a translator on this book.
Yeah, I think you have to do it in layers. You have to first get it as accurate as you can, and then make it into its own piece of literature in English version.
But I have actually learned to trust the translators. There are some languages that I'm able to read. And I once met like 20 years ago with my French translator, and I read French and we speak French at home. My wife is French speaking. And I told him, I can read the stuff afterwards. Maybe I can find something. when you are finished with the translation, and he said to me after 2 beers that there is nothing more terrible on earth than a Scandinavian writer who thinks he speaks French.
Yeah.
But I tend to not to mingle that much into it, apart from German and French and English. The other languages I have to trust the translator. But in this book, for instance, I use a lot of archaic words, dialects and sociolects from a northern part of Norway. And also quite a huge maritime lexicon. So I made a list of words. It's like 400 words that I send around to all the translators, and it turns out that nearly every language has a similar or something that is compatible to this very, very strange and remote and archaic language that I thought just existed in Norway, which is also a very amusing experience for me. But trust, I think, is the main, my main attitude towards translate. I have huge respect for the work they're doing. And by the way, the guys that have translated my books, Don Shaw and Don Bartlett, they are amazing. And I also experience in reviews sentences like, it looks like it has been written in English. And that's probably the best compliment a translator can get.
I think none of us would mind being in the situation of just trusting all our translators into all the world's languages.
What do you do with Finnish? You have to trust them.
Yeah, I mean, I hope.
And also Swedish.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think this will be the last question here, and it's been a favorite of other panels as well. So I'm interested to hear what everyone says. They are interested in which Norwegian writers inspire you, or I guess if you're, or what are you reading now, or any books that have inspired you recently?
Do you want to start first?
Yeah, well, I'm just about to begin on volume 2 of Jon Fosse's Septology. The first volume came last year, and now it's the second, and then it's 3 altogether. And he's actually from the same soil or region in Western Norway as I am. So maybe that's why I feel very connected to his kind of writing, I think. Yeah, and he writes both plays and poetry and novels, and not crime fiction, or not traditional crime fiction, I think, but yeah. But this Septology is like a very great and very interesting and very nice novel.
It's it either is out in English
Yeah.
in the US, or it will be.
Yeah, it was actually published in English before, or at the same time as it was published in Norway just now. So yeah, it's out.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I read just as much about butterflies and snakes and biology as fiction. But just now I read Erik Fosnes Hansen's new novel, and it's about the strangest book I've ever put my eyes on. I thought, what in hell is this guy doing? How are the critics gonna stomach this effort? It's like Dada. It's like a picture of Salvador Dali or whatever, on the sentence level, on the story level. The whole narrative is so crazy, and not boring in a repetitive way. It's always, he has found some interesting stuff that you have, you get associations totally different from what you expected when you start to read a sentence. It's so amazing, and it's so unlike him. He's a friend of mine, So I was so surprised this summer when I read his book, and then something totally different by another colleague called Tore Renberg, who I read his book and I thought, my God, what's happened to him? I always liked his work, but all of a sudden he's done something completely different. It's a masterpiece. So that's what I've done. That's what I've been reading the last couple of months, apart from all the books about butterflies.
Do either of you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one writer I would recommend is Trude Marstein, who really writes super classical realism. And it's, well, I mean, if you can get away from fiction by reading about butterflies, then it's good for me to get away from academia and read just really, really well done realist fiction, the kind where you forget occasionally that you're reading something that has been constructed. It just seems entirely natural. She's very, very good at doing that.
I have two I would like to highlight, and I don't think either of them are translated into English, unfortunately, but they should be. The one is Aina Villanger, who has written, I think her latest novel was more of like a collage work, Baugeidsbok. I don't know if any of you know that, but it's about the first, what is it called? She was a nun, and so she was
Novice.
Yeah, she was the first novice that we had in Norway. So it's historical fiction, but it's fiction. It's written around with church book excerpts and recipes for how you should drive bad spirits out of your body, and it's a magnificent work. And also Ingvild Rishøi. She's a short story writer. All of her work is amazing. So yeah, that would be nice to see it translated into English, I think.
Great. Well, I've already given some recommendations in this room, so I guess that's maybe the end, Kyle, or what?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end for now. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Again, thank you to Norla for the support and also lending the offices so these authors can actually meet in person. And yes, and please do join us next week for the panel on the Sami, which will be a very interesting talk since it's so unknown right now. Again, thank you everyone, and please do join us again. And remember, all these panels have been recorded, and you're able to find them on our YouTube and our Scandinavias.org website. So thank you, and please do join us again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.